Welcome to section 5-3, Human Population Growth. So this particular section only deals with human population growth statistics and information. The human population is growing at a rate of nearly 3 people per second. So once again, the human population is growing at a rate of nearly 3 people per second, which is quite rapidly. For most of human existence, the population grew extremely slowly, and there were certain factors, which we call limiting factors, that kept the population size low. And the first one would be life was very harsh. What this means is they didn't have all of the wonderful opportunities that you have right now as far as electricity and running water and gas-powered vehicles. So life was very difficult back in the day. Food was extremely scarce. There weren't grocery stores for the people to go and buy their groceries. They had to grow their own food or barter with other people to get their food. And also, incurable diseases were rampant. They didn't have the medical advances that we have today. So all of these particular limiting factors kept the population size extremely low. Only half the children survived to adulthood, so families had many children to make sure that they would survive. And the children died because of those particular situations. Once agriculture and industry came into the picture, that made life a lot easier. And when we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about the opportunity to produce large amounts of food at one time and then ship it to someplace else. Improved sanitation, medicine, and healthcare also reduced the death rate and increased the longevity of humans. So once again, these particular things, agriculture and industry, made life a lot easier, plus improved sanitation, medicine, and healthcare also helped with the death rate. So if we look at this particular curve here, of course you see it as a J-shaped curve. With these advances, the human population experienced exponential growth. And what you learned from the previous section, that exponential growth has a J-shaped curve. So we're looking way back in 10,000 BC. Things were very slow, and then all of a sudden, when the Industrial Revolution took place, that would be where we had industries and mass agriculture happen, then the population took off to a very high amount. If the human population grew exponentially, all of our resources would run out. And you learned this from the previous section that there's a limit to what a particular environment can sustain. Today, scientists have identified a variety of social and economic factors that can affect specifically human populations. And there are particular people who study human populations, and the study of human population is called demography. So demography is the science of studying human populations. And what do they look at? They look at specifically the birth rate, the death rate, and the age structure of a population. And this is what helps them to predict why some countries have grown at a very high rate and while other countries are currently growing more slowly. Once again, they look at the birth rate, the death rate, and the age structure of that particular population to determine the growth rate of a particular country. Demographic transition is the opportunity for a country to reach its so-called capacity, or where the population has kind of leveled off, where birth rate and death rate are kind of equal and there is no significant or high growth, as in exponential growth. So the population growth in the United States, Japan, and much of Europe has slowed dramatically. These countries have completed what is called demographic transition, which is a dramatic change in the birth and death rates. So once again, the countries that you have to remember that have experienced or completed demographic transition are the United States, Japan, and much of Europe. Due to advances in society, the death rate now is much lower, thus demographic transition has begun. So how does this whole thing about demographic transition work? Well, when the death rate first begins to fall, birth rates remain extremely high, so population is going to increase rapidly. This happened between 1790 and 1910, and it is still happening in these countries: South America, Africa, and Asia. Once again, how does this work? It's when the death rate first begins to fall and the birth rate remains high. That's still happening in South America, Africa, and Asia. Modernization, higher education, and an increase in the standard of living, families have fewer children, so birth rates fall. Once again, modernization, higher education, and an increase in the standard of living, families have fewer children, so birth rate then falls. And we can see this just from back when probably your grandparents, they probably came from larger families that had a lot of siblings. And we're not talking about a blended family, we're talking about a nuclear family. So that would mean that, back in the possibly 50s and 60s, families had, 6, 7, 8 children. Whereas now they may have 1, 2, or 3 children to a nuclear family. Once again, that doesn't count a blended family. That's a nuclear family. Demographic transition is complete when the birth rate falls to meet the death rate and population growth stops. So once again, when the birth rate falls to meet or equals the death rate, then population growth stops. And that has what is happened here in the United States. As far as countries that have not yet completed demographic transition, that would be most people in the world. So before in the previous slide, we said that the United States, Japan, and most of Europe have completed demographic transition. India and China lead in growth along with 10 other countries. So these particular countries have a problem when it comes to population growth. Age structure is comparing how many different people in different age groups make up the population. So population growth depends on how many different people at different ages make up a given population. And there's a diagram that demographers look at in order to study this. So an age structure diagram graphs the numbers of people in different age groups in the population. Once again, an age structure diagram graphs the numbers of people in different age groups in the population. So if we compare two separate age structure diagrams, which I have in your note packet, you'll see that when we look at the US population, and this may have changed slightly from this particular date because I think there are more people up in this category right now than you'll probably see in this category because these are your baby boomers. And when the book was written, this particular group was large in here and they have now moved up to the higher category. Compare it to the Rwandan population, and you can see that here is the largest part of the population is at the lower because they do not live to be a specific age because life is still harsh in Rwanda, food is scarce, and they do not have the technological advances that we have here in the United States. So you'll notice that those two age structure diagrams are completely different because of the countries that you're looking at. As far as future population growth, they try to predict how the world's population will grow. So they have to consider many factors when they are doing these predictions. The age structure of each country, because countries do change and develop, and the prevalence of life-threatening diseases in the particular area. And I think in some countries you might consider, if it's a war zone, that might also have an impact on the population growth. Current projections suggest that the population of the world will reach 9 billion people in the year 2050. Once again, current projections suggest that the population will reach 9 billion in the year 2050. The growth rate may level off or even decrease if countries that are currently growing rapidly move towards demographic transition. In 2050, the growth rate is projected to be 0.43%. The peak growth rate of 2.19% was reached in the early 1960s. And if we think about when industry and agriculture and a lot of these things really came into play, especially industry, the baby boomers here in the United States, that's when we had the largest birth rate going on. That concludes section 5-3.